Lucile Bluford has been the voice of conscience for Kansas City area and Missouri for over 50 years, Senator Eagleton said. During the past year, you and I have been talking about your life and work. Today, let's try to bring together your experience and activities that were behind his words.
Why don't you say it once again? We can always do this twice with television.
Good. Okay.
Anytime.
Lucile Bluford has been the voice of conscience for the Kansas City area and Missouri for over 50 years, Senator Eagleton said. During the past year, you and I have been talking about your life and work. Today, let's try to bring together your experience and activities that were behind his words. You have both the questions and answers on
Sure.
it if you can.
All right.
Good.
Anytime.
Miss Bluford, who were the people who were most influential on you as you were growing up?
Well, my father, for one. You mean as far as the interest in journalism is concerned?
Yes, yes.
Well, my father was an avid reader. He read the newspaper from cover to cover every day, and he was very influential. I followed him and started reading also as a youngster, and then he was an officer with the NACP branch here, and he influenced me to become active with that organization. Then there was a teacher named Trussie Smothers, an English teacher at Lincoln High School. And I think it was largely her influence that caused me to go into the field of journalism. Because when I was a junior, she asked me to be on the staff of the Lincolnite, which was the school newspaper, and the Lincolnian, which was the annual. So I stayed after school and worked on those two publications and got an interest in writing and journalism.
And I understand that when you were in high school, you stopped by the office of the Call every once in a while.
Oh, yes, I did. We were only, well, I had to pass the Call on my way home from school. And I knew some of the people here. Well, as a matter of fact, Mr. Franklin, the founder and editor of the Call, was a neighbor and a friend of my family. So I stopped in here and also visited with Roy Wilkins, who was his news editor at the time.
What was that column you told me that Roy Wilkins wrote and that you always tried to look at?
He wrote a column called Talking It Over. Every week. It appeared on the editorial page of the Call each week. And every time the Call came out on Friday, I would turn to his column first and say to myself, well, I wonder what Roy is complaining about this week. Because he was always criticizing something that was wrong in the community. And it was always interesting the way he put it, and I liked to read about it.
What kinds of things was he criticizing? Was it
mostly discrimination and segregation that he would hear about, stories that he would hear about. He would write about it and comment on it.
No wonder your interest began so early.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you're telling me that you never even considered the University of Missouri when you started to think of college. Where else did you think of going?
Well, I didn't think of Missouri because everybody knew that Missouri did not admit Negroes. We called ourselves at that time black people. I wanted to go to Howard University in Washington, where my dad went, but for some reason he didn't want me to go that far away from home. So I guess it was by mutual consent that I went to the University of Kansas, which was closed.
Now, what was your experience like at the University of Kansas? Did you run into any difficulties racially there?
Well, some, although the University of Missouri did not admit blacks at all, Kansas did, but there were certain restrictions that it had. For instance, black students could not play on the athletic teams, no foot, and as prominent as blacks are now on the KU basketball and football teams, in those days you couldn't even try out if you were black. Swimming was a requirement for graduation, but that requirement was waived as far as black students were concerned. We didn't have to take swimming. And the student union building was open for the most part. The cafeteria was open to all, but there was another a smaller eating place there, which didn't welcome black students. And we had to protest and go to the chancellor to finally get that open. So there were those smaller things. As far as the classroom experience was concerned, some students had difficulty with some of the faculty members, but I didn't experience much difficulty along that line.
How about the School of Journalism itself? I think you mentioned there was a Marie Ross who had gone there before you.
Well, I entered the School of Journalism as a sophomore. Miss Ross, who incidentally is a member of the call staff even now, Miss Ross went to the School of Journalism ahead of me. She was the first black student ever to attend the School of Journalism at the University of Kansas. She was about 3 years ahead of me, and I was a freshman. She was a senior leaving. So she experienced quite a bit of difficulty. For instance, Dean Flint, who was in charge of the School of Journalism, tried to discourage Miss Ross as much as he could. He tried to discourage her from even attending the School of Journalism, because he said that she would have difficulty finding a job when she got through. There was no place in journalism for blacks, and he couldn't understand why she was there. So Marie is very determined, and she wouldn't be discouraged. So she too, like me, was familiar with the people at the call. So she came down one weekend and talked to Roy Wilkins and told Roy Wilkins what Dean Flint said, and asked him. She arranged for him to come and speak to some of the students at KU. But more important than that, she and he got a pile of black newspapers about that high. At that time, there were about 200 or more black papers published all around the country, and evidently they didn't know about that up at KU. So Marie took these papers up to school one day and showed them to Dean Flint, and said, showing him where she could get a job. As a dean, he's the dean of the School of Journalism, but he didn't know that there were black newspapers being published. He'd never heard of them. Even the call, I guess he hadn't heard of. So after that, and then after Roy Wilkins went up and spoke, and she didn't have so much trouble after that. But by the time I got there 3 years later, Marie had paved the way, and I didn't have any trouble at all. I got along fine with the faculty members and the students. I never did take any courses from Dean Flint, however.
You worked a lot on the KU newspaper, didn't you?
Well, yes, I worked on the University Daily Kansan after school and during school hours. And I became night editor and telegraph editor. In those days, the national news were taken on by telegram with, the earphones. So I did that in the evenings. And I enjoyed my work there very much, very much.
One of your friends told me you practically lived in the journalism
I
department.
probably did.
Then your friend Dorothy also told me about the students who nominated you for Theta Sigma Phi while you were there, the Honorary Journalism Society. Tell a little bit about that.
Well, as I said, my relationship with the students was good. We worked together on getting the paper out. And I was the KU chapter nominated me for membership in, what's the name of it?
Theta Sigma Phi, I think, that later became Women in Communications
now. But they nominated me, sent my name in, but the national chapter, the national headquarters of the sorority, had a ban on blacks and said they couldn't initiate me because I was a Negro. So the young ladies who had nominated me were very disappointed. Matter of fact, I believe they're more disappointed than I was. But later on, years later, after I got out of school, then the sorority wanted to initiate me into the graduate chapter. It was Women in Communications by then. And, but that's the way it was in those days.
Mm. When you were in college, did you think that you'd have a career that would absorb your whole life, or did you think in terms of having a husband and children? What were your thoughts and dreams in those days as a young woman?
From my early days, I liked to work, and yes, I did think I'd have a career, and I didn't think too much about marriage and children and that sort of thing. Just didn't think too much about it. If it happened, okay, and if it didn't, okay. So it happens that it did. It didn't. So.
I guess you've told me that there were always children around the call office that women brought, and you could play with and know.
I like children. Yeah, I like children. I like to play with them, but I'm always glad to give them back to their parents at the end of the day. And Roy Wilkins' brother,
Earl
Wilkins, who worked at the call also, had a little boy named Roger. And when his father got sick, Roger was 4 or 5 years old, and I used to take Roger and a little friend of his out often, like to the zoo and places like that, and the other children in the neighborhood as well.
Then we have a very nice picture that I found in the file of you with Guyan Bluford, the first Negro astronaut.
Oh, my nephew. Yeah.
Were you close to him and he close to you as he was growing up?
Well, somewhat. We were pretty far apart in distance. He and his family lived in Philadelphia, and I lived here. But I used to visit them quite often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And I remember going to visit my brother and his wife when Guyan, the astronaut, was a little baby. He was their firstborn. So I was pretty close to them as they grew up. He had 2 brothers and 3 of them. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty close to them as they grew up.
I think you told me before that you knew that though you would have a career, you didn't want to be a teacher, you didn't want to be a nurse. Now, what do you think journalism meant to you? What did writing mean to you, and what has it meant later through the years?
Well, it's been a part of my life. You mentioned the fact that I didn't want to be a teacher. That was right. I knew from the beginning, when I was even in high school, that I didn't want to be a teacher. I had teachers in my family. I don't know whether that was the reason or not, but I just didn't have the inclination to stand up in front of a group and talk to them and teach. I didn't think I was teacher material. And there were not too many careers that black girls at that time could follow. Teaching was one, nursing was one, social work. I did consider becoming a librarian because I have always liked to read. I thought about being a librarian, and probably would have been if I hadn't gotten into journalism through Miss Smothers largely. But even in high school, I like to meet people and see what they're doing and write about them. And I got the habit in high school and continued it in KU, and have enjoyed it all during my adult life. I like to be around people and see what's going on in the community, and I just enjoy writing about it.
Now, when you finished KU, you didn't immediately come to the call. Was it a paper in Atlanta that you went to work for?
Well, yes, but I had planned to come to the call because during the summers when I was in KU, I would work on the call staff while the regular people like Marie Ross and Mr. Wilkins, when they were on vacation, I would fill in for them, and I enjoyed that. I think they paid me about $8 a week. So I had planned and promised to come to the call when I graduated. In fact, Mr. Franken, I had promised him I was coming. But about a year before I finished, a family of Scots started the Atlanta Daily World. That was the first black daily in the country. That was about 1931, and I think I was a junior at the time. And two of the Scott brothers came to KU to study journalism. The father sent him there so he could have some help. And I met them. They told me about it. So the next year when I finished, I sought a job there and got it. And then I had the problem of telling Mr. Franklin that I wasn't coming to the call. It wasn't that I didn't want to come to the call, but you know how young people are, they like to get away from home. So I made an appointment to come by here and see Mr. Franklin and tell him. And that I'd like to take this job down in Atlanta and I wouldn't be coming here. And he was nicer about it than I thought he would be. He said, well, you're young and you can change your mind, so I'll let you go. So I went on down to Atlanta and worked down there 3 or 4 months. I didn't stay too long.
Why was that?
Well, I was working at night, which was all right. I didn't mind working at night. But it was extremely hot in Atlanta. Not that it's not hot in Kansas City, but I believe it was hotter. Then the streetcars down there were segregated, and strange as it may seem, although we had plenty of segregation and discrimination in Kansas City, our streetcars were always open. Never had to be bothered with sitting in the back, and I wasn't accustomed to it. So I'd get on the streetcar in Atlanta, sit down, and the motorman would tell me to move back. Well, after 2 or 3 times, I said, I just couldn't stand that. I didn't like it. And I tried to stay off the streetcar and walk where I had to go. And one day I was out looking at the Atlanta University campus, which was just being built then. And, you know, in a construction area, the ground is pretty rough. And I sprained my ankle. And then a little later on, I sprained another, and I had both my ankles, and I was having a hard time getting around, not riding a streetcar either. So I decided I believe I'd come home. So I just came on home. I think if I hadn't sprained my ankles, I might have still been down there.
I think I remember you telling me that there wasn't a place for you on the call, so you worked for another newspaper
when I came home, there wasn't a place here for me. But there was another little paper called the Kansas City American, which was operated by Dr. William J. Tompkins, who later became Recorder of Deeds in Washington. The paper was just about 2 blocks down 18th Street from the car, just about 2 blocks down, around 18th Lucile. So I went down there. I was going to work somewhere, so, of course, the Star was out of the question in those days, you know. So I went down there and worked until, I worked, I don't know how long, somewhere maybe a year or a little less. I worked down there until I got a telephone call from Mr. Franklin one day, saying that he was having making some staff changes, and that there was a job here for me if I wanted it. So I came on to the call then. He moved Earl Wilkins, Roy Wilkins by that time had gone to New York to work with NACP, and his brother Earl took his place in the newsroom. So when Mr. Franklin had this shake-up, more or less, he moved Earl Wilkins to head the advertising department. Therefore he had an opening in the newsroom, so that's where I came as a cub reporter.
Tell a little bit more about Mr. Franklin and the kind of newspaper he tried to put out.
Well, he always emphasized that he wanted the call to be a clean newspaper. A lot of the black weeklies at that time were more sensational, with crime news, spread across headlines. Mr. Franklin didn't want to publish that sort of paper. He wanted a paper that played up the accomplishments and achievements of black people. And he used to say he wanted his paper to be one that people could take on a train or on a streetcar or a bus and hold up and read without being ashamed of the type of news stories that were on it. Then he also always urged us to play up news of little people, everybody, not the prominent doctors and dentists and lawyers and people like that, but the call was for the average person. Anybody could get news in the call. And news has always been free in the call. Some papers used to charge a little bit for your social news, but ours has always been free. And that was one of Mr. Franklin's basic premises.
Well, what was the role of Mr. Franklin's mother? I thought that was interesting.
Well, when Mr. Franklin started the car back in 1919, he came here from Denver. And when he and his mother moved from Denver here, Mrs. Franklin, his mother, helped him build up the circulation. Mr. Franklin was busy with news at that time, with printing the paper. He was a printer. And so his mother took over the role of building up readership. Miss Franklin in the evenings would go from house to house, in the evenings I say when people were home from work, go from house to house in all the area, urging people to buy the card or selling them a subscription. The call at that time was started out for a nickel. So that was her role, and she really built a solid circulation, because almost everybody in the black community read the call every Friday. We were concentrated, as far as housing is concerned, almost all black people were concentrated in a small area. 27th Street was the boundary, was the southernmost boundary. Black families didn't live beyond 27th Street, so we were concentrated between 27th and the Independence Avenue, the river, and east of, and mostly from Truce to Brooklyn, about as far as, and all the black people lived in that area. So Miss Franklin could walk from door to door and eventually get most everybody. We had a high concentration of readership in our area, largely through Mrs. Franklin. And she was an older lady, too.
That's amazing, isn't it? Now, Mr. Franklin was a great fighter for causes, wasn't he?
Yes, Mr. Franklin and Reverend D.A. Holmes, who was pastor of the Sale Baptist Church for, somewhere between 40 and 50 years, were a team. They were sort of a team. Both of them had loud, booming voices. Both of them were tall, big men. And they fought, in the first place, they fought against this artificial housing boundary. They fought for equal housing. They fought for equality in education, for jobs. Wherever there was discrimination, Mr. Franklin and Reverend Holmes were spokesmen against it. And I know frequently they'd go down to see the mayor, city council people, and anybody if they had something that they wanted to get corrected. So I was just starting out, and I'd see them go down. So I asked them if I could go with them, and they said yes. So I tagged along behind them, and probably got my interest then in civic affairs through watching them. I just go tag along. I learned a lot from both of them.
Now that would have been in the 30s.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
Wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been the 30s.
And I understand that Mr. Franklin had quite a temper when he felt that something wasn't right.
Yeah, I've seen Mr. Franklin pound his fist on the mayor's desk for something that he believed in, you know. And those city officials weren't paying much attention to black folks in those days. So he did when things weren't going right. He had a temper, yeah.
Did the temper ever come out in the newsroom?
Oh, maybe in one little way. As you probably know, since you've been around me for the last year or so, I accumulate a lot of material. Some people say it's junk, but I am sort of junky, and I pile stuff up, and things get cluttered. So Mr. Franklin would come through there sometime and say about the newsroom, "This room looks like hell." Well, I didn't say anything, but that's all he'd say, and then he'd go on about his business. But then on the weekends, when he'd do that, on the weekends, like on Sundays, I would come down and try to straighten things up a little bit. And there it did get real straight.
But I think you said at the same time he really cared about his employees. Tell that story about your car and his trying to help you out.
Oh, well, one day I'd been to lunch or somewhere, and I came back and was parking on the street, on 18th Street, and I had a hard time parallel parking. Had a hard time getting in the spot. But I got in it and came on in, and Mr. Franklin called me. He said, "Come here just a minute." And then he said, "I was watching you out there trying to park." So he took a piece of paper and a pencil and showed me on the piece of paper how to drive parallel to the car in front and how to back in. He showed me on the paper how to park in there. And you know, I haven't had any trouble parking since.
That would have been quite a while later when you were able to have a car.
Have a car, yeah.
Not in
Well,
the
yeah,
30s, probably.
yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, I guess that could have been in the 40s, I think, or so. Because I got a car early for the simple reason that the streetcars didn't run well. We worked kind of late even then. Not as late as we work now. We work to 12 or 1 o'clock now. But then we might work till 9 or 10. Now, I didn't have any trouble coming down in the morning. I had to transfer at Prospect, 18th and Prospect. Didn't have no trouble. But going home in the evening, the streetcar went down 19th Street. And that 19th Street car was real slow. You'd have to wait and wait and wait, sometimes a half hour. Well, that's the reason I got a car. I got my first car. I paid $35 for my first car.
And you hung on to it for quite a while, didn't you?
I hung on to it until somebody stole it on a Halloween night. And then I was on the streetcar again, because they stripped it. And I was back on the streetcar for a while till I could afford to buy another car.
Yeah.
But the reason I got the car was because if the streetcars had been running well and regularly, I probably wouldn't have gotten a car.
Now, you told me once, I think, that Saturday mornings were rather special at the call.
Well, it was Saturday noon. The weekly checks were issued at noon, and Mr. Franklin had what he called a staff meeting every Saturday at 12 o'clock. He would talk about his plans and his goals and what he wanted us to do and so forth. And then, in addition to that, he provided entertainment for the staff people. The entertainment usually being some visitor from out of town. Kansas City used to attract visitors just like it does now. But most of the prominent visitors like Walter White and Dean Pickens from the NAACP, entertainers, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington. Most anybody of prominence who came to Kansas City came to the call office first. They came to the call office, and Mr. Franklin would engage them if they were going to be here on Saturday to come and speak to the call staff. That meeting didn't last over about an hour, or maybe less. But we really didn't. Bojangles used to come by, and he used to tap dance around the call office. Joe Lewis was here. Joe Lewis used to be stationed down in Fort Riley, Kansas, and he would come to Kansas City on the weekend. He was a frequent visitor in the call. Almost anybody of any prominence in the country who came to Kansas City came to the call first. Now, when they come to town, they go to the television station, they go to the Star, but in those days, the Star didn't have any, didn't pay much attention to black people except in the matter of crime. Crime stories are about the only ones that appeared in the Star. Of course, we didn't have television. So they came to the call where they got exposure, where they got publicity. And that's the only way people knew they were here, is to read it in the call. So A. Philip Randolph was another one, the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And the one, I don't know whether you knew Mr. Randolph or not, but he organized the first March on Washington in protest of the fact that the black people were not getting jobs. So he used to come to here. He had a chapter here, and he came by the call. So people like that were here all the time, and that's how we got so many prominent people speaking at the Saturday staff meeting. Of course, sometimes the people were local, but sometimes they're all from out of town too. And then every once in a while he'd have lunch. You know, there was a barbecue man called Perry up at 19th and Highland, up a couple of blocks up the street. and he called himself the barbecue king, and he sometimes would send enough barbecue down here for everybody to eat, you know. So the Saturday meetings were sort of a joyful thing, joyful occasion. It wasn't the kind of so serious that people didn't want to come. They came and enjoyed it.
This whole 18th and Vine district was very different in those days, wasn't
it? It really was.
We better start another tape before
Good.
we get into another answer.
Good, because we needed a little break.
Different in those days from what it is now, wasn't it?
It certainly was. Today, the area is rather vacated almost, with houses and apartments and so forth boarded up and not in use, because the population in general, the black population in general, has moved south and east of here. This used to be the business hubbub of the black community. Here at the call, we could walk to Vine Street, which is 2 blocks down, and we had a choice of 10 or 12 different places, for instance, where we could eat lunch. There were 3 or 4 drugstores, a drugstore at 18th and Vine, and a drugstore at 19th and Vine. There was a restaurant next to the Crown Drugstore at 18th and Vine. Between Vine and Paseo, that one little block, we had the Crown Drugstore on the corner, Eleanor's Restaurant, which was a nice black-owned establishment. The Streets Hotel was next to that. And there were 2 places in there where you could eat. And then around on Paseo, around another block away, there was a Paseo YMCA, which had a cafeteria, and that's when I started picking up weight, incidentally. And then we had the YWCA on the other corner of 19th and Paseo. Then there were places to eat all along Vine Street between 18th and say 24th Street. Had all kinds of places. We had businesses of all kinds, including Savings and Loan, the People's Finance Corporation, which operated somewhat was like on the Savings and Loan Association. The Urban League was located on Vine. The Lincoln Building, 18th and Vine, which has now been renovated in its original form, had housed offices of doctors, lawyers, dentists, organizations like NAACP had its headquarters in the Lincoln Building, and everything almost that people did was centered around 18th and Vine.
And it used to be one of the jazz centers
And it was a jazz
of the country, wasn't it?
Absolutely, 18th and 12th, but largely 18th Street. And Count Basie, for instance, used to play the organ in the Eblon Theater. The Eblon Theater was on Vine between 18th and 19th. Black owned. We even had a automobile dealership operated by a man named Homer Roberts, who had a Hupmobile agency way back in those days. People just rode Hupmobiles because I guess people of the day never heard of a Hupmobile, but it was a popular car then. And the Paseo YMCA was the meeting place for most organizations. Some met in churches, but a lot of them met at the Y. The Y was a central meeting place. And it's sad now to see it all boarded up, not in use at all.
It is, isn't it?
Everything, we have a Y, but it's way out on Linwood and Cleveland.
To get back to the call, as I've looked at pictures of the staff of the call in those early days and later too, there have always been a lot of women in those pictures, in the newsroom as well as in the commercial staff.
Yes, that's true.
Now that's different from many newspapers, white newspapers in that era.
Yes, I guess so, but women have always played a prominent role here. I don't know whether that's because of Mr. Franklin and his mother. I mean, he had respect for women because of what his mother did. I don't know if that was it, but it could be. But his chief financial officer, accountant, was a woman, Geneva Brown, for many, many years. And she had women under her. course, her husband at the time was foreman of our mechanical department, Fred Brown. They came here as a team. But there's never been any discrimination against women in the call.
Now that's quite different. I remember the story you told me, maybe you'll tell it again, of your friend on the Star who asked if you had ever applied for a job at the Star.
Well, no, when I came out of school, I didn't apply at the Star because I knew, just like the University of Missouri, I knew that the Star didn't hire black people. And I found out also that the Star at that time didn't hire women. And some of the girls that came out of KU with me couldn't get a job at the Star. They had to go someplace else because they just weren't hiring women. It was many years later that they did. So they've changed a lot. But at that time, there was just no chance of getting a job at the Star. Yeah. So no, I didn't apply because I knew better.
Now, what did you do during those early days at the Call when you first came on during the first decade or so?
I mean, what kind of work?
Yes.
Well, I started, the first job that Roy Wilkins gave me, for instance, when I came here in a summer employee, was to look through the exchanges, those black papers I told you about. Look through those and pick out some editorials that he could use in a little section he had, what other papers say. He had what other papers say. We had 2 or 3 editorials from different papers. So he had me do that. That kind of worked for a while in the office. And then my main job at first was to cover the police courts. The city hall and the police station were located then around 5th and Main, down where the market is now. So I would go down there regularly, check on the crime news and court news, and I became friendly with the police officers. And as they got to know you, they would take you along sometime when they had to investigate some case. I remember going with one of the detectives one time to a murder scene down on Paseo. That was not when I first started, but a little later on. So I would do that, and then we had what we call a police blotter with little items, little crime news. So I did that, then in addition to working in the office on rewrites and covering meetings. I covered a lot of meetings. We had all kinds of meetings, mainly at the Centennial, in various churches, including the Centennial Methodist Church at 19th and Woodland. That's where we had forums on Sundays, where people from out of town would come and speak. Now, sometimes they're not all on Sunday, but we had regular forums on Sundays where we discussed various community issues. And then when people came from out of town to speak, that's mainly where they spoke.
I think you mentioned that there was a man, Frank Young, here, who taught you composing.
Oh, Frank Young was a sports editor on the Chicago Defender for many, many years. Then he came here as news editor, and I worked under him for a number of years. And I did work we worked in the composing room. We used to have a Tulsa edition of the Call, and we had a St. Louis edition of the Call. And I remember I was sort of in charge of putting the Tulsa paper together. It was we had an office in Tulsa at one time, so I did work in the composing room, making up the paper with hot type, you know.
Got your hands dirty with
hot type? Inky. Hands got inky. But you sort of enjoyed it, and all you had to do was use some lava soap and clean your hands. But yeah, I worked in the composing room once, twice a week.
And then just jumping ahead a little ways to 1942, there was that terrible last lynching in Sykeston, and you were one of 2 who went down and covered that, I think. Now,
Well, we didn't cover the lynching, but we went down the day afterwards because we didn't know about it ahead of time. But Yes, that was a terrible thing. Of course, lynchings were pretty prevalent around the country. At that time, we had almost had a lynching a week. Not around here, but down south. And NACP kept you informed on those. But we didn't have many lynchings here. But that was a shameful thing down in Saxon, where they lynched a black man and took him out of jail, I think, when he was still alive. He was dying from a patrolman's bullet wound, and they tied him behind a truck and dragged him through the streets of that town. It's down in southeast Missouri. And the day after that, after we heard about this, I decided I'd like to go down there and see what was all about if I could. So I took a reporter photographer named Samuel McKibben with me. McKibben and I drove down there and spent a couple of days investigating it.
And it was really investigative reporting, it seems to me.
Yeah, it was because we tried to get to the whys and wherefores of it. You know, usually many lynchings, especially in the Deep South, occurred because white women accused blacks of raping them. This, however, was not a matter of rape. The man who was lynched was sort of accused of a burglary. It never was real clear what he did, but he wasn't raped. But the white people got so incensed about it that they lynched him. That was a terrible thing.
Oh. And then after you did your, what seemed to me, a very thorough investigation, you came up with some very strong ideas about the whole situation.
Well, we found that the lynching could have been prevented by the law enforcement officials, because they seemed to know ahead of time that they were going to have the lynching. Because some officers went through the black community, and the blacks in that town, as well as most towns, were concentrated in a certain little area. I think it was called Sunset, a little black section. Law enforcement officials went through that area the day before or that morning, telling the people to get off the street, telling black folks to get off the street because there's going to be a demonstration here pretty soon. We don't want you to get hurt. We're going to have a little fun, they said, called a lynching fun. So they didn't have to have the lynchings if they knew it was going to happen. They could have taken the prisoner to another town, another county, for safekeeping. But they didn't. Lynchings were, as he said, fun for white people in those days. So that could have been prevented. And we did call for a thorough investigation of it. Asked the governor to make an investigation of it. And we never heard anything from the investigation, though. You know, the governor said he was going to do it, but it didn't materialize.
What a terrible thing.
Oh, it was awful. They dragged his body through the town and then burned it.
One terrible thing on top of another, wasn't it?
Awful.
Let's go back a little ways now to 1939, to the time when you decided to apply for graduate work at the University of Missouri, just after Lloyd Gaines had won a Supreme Court case, and the Supreme Court has said that he should be able to go to the law school. Why did you decide to apply for the graduate journalism school there?
Well, I've always had deep curiosity about things. And the Supreme Court decision in the Gaines case occurred in December 1938. Well, the first chance for Gaines to apply, the Supreme Court said the state of Missouri must educate in the professional schools all black applicants within the state, within the boundaries of Missouri. Prior to that, the state of Missouri had given scholarships and tuition, had paid the tuition of black students to go to nearby or adjoining universities. Kansas, Iowa, Illinois. They admitted blacks, Missouri didn't. So black students in Missouri who wanted to take a course offered at the University of Missouri in Columbia, but not offered at Lincoln University, the black school in Jefferson City, could get tuition from the state to go to some of these adjoining universities. Supreme Court decision in the Gaines case said Missouri couldn't do that any longer. You can't pay tuition for some other school. You have to provide graduate work in our profession within your own borders. So the first chance for Gaines to apply or to enter would have been the second semester of 1939. Well, Gaines indicated that he wouldn't go until September 1939. I don't remember whether maybe the law school didn't admit students at mid-year or what, but anyway, he made a speech here up to Centennial Church and said he would not be going to school, to university until September. Well, I was sitting in my office one day. I said, well, I wonder what in the world would happen if Gaines did go. What would Missouri do? Would they let him in or what? I was just curious. So I said, well, I'll ask KU to send my credits down to the University of Missouri, and I'm going to apply for graduate work in journalism. Because the same same Supreme Court decision would apply to journalism as well as law. So Gaines had won his case for the law school, but he would apply for dentistry, medicine, anything. Huh? So they sent my credits up to down to University of Missouri, and I submitted a letter of application, and received a letter from the registrar, S.W. Kennedy, saying that my credits had been accepted and that I could enter the beginning of the second semester to come down to the university a certain day and a certain time and where to go. So on that certain day I went down there and to enroll. And I told Mr. Franklin at the time I wasn't all that anxious to go, but I wanted to know what was going to happen, and I said to Mr. Franklin, if they accept me, I'd have to take a leave of absence and go to school. And he said, okay. So I was prepared to do that. My dad didn't think too much of it, but I was anxious to do it.
Was he worried about you?
Yeah, he was worried about my safety, I think, more than anything else. So I went down to, I've forgotten the name of the hall now, the administration building anyway, and stood in line. And there was an enrollment line. I stood in line, and I noticed people from all over the world around the hall there, from India, the Orient, all kinds of people, except black Americans. I was the only black American in line. So I stood in line. Nobody paid any attention to me, because I say you had all these people, these foreigners. They didn't pay attention. So I'd been in line, I guess, 15 to 20 minutes, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, Miss Bluford? And I said, well, how you know my name? And I said, yeah. And he said, Mr. Kennedy wants to see you in his office. So I couldn't figure out what was going on, so I followed the man to Mr. Kennedy's office. And there, he told me that he couldn't admit me. And I said, why not? You sent me a letter telling me to come down and enroll. And the Gaines case said that I should be admitted. And he said, yes, but we can't do it now because the United States Supreme Court decision, he said the Gaines case is not completely settled yet. The Supreme Court decision has got to come down to the Missouri Supreme Court, and then to the appeals court, and then to the district court, and then to us, to the university. And we haven't received any notice. In other words, he tried to tell me he hadn't received any notice that the Gaines decision had been made. So he refused to admit me. So there wasn't anything I could do about it except, you know, he said he couldn't accept me, so I couldn't. So I left and went over to the journalism school and visited with some of the faculty members. Now, they were just as nice. Nobody would have paid any attention. If they had admitted me, nobody would have paid any attention to it, any more than they did those other foreigners. But black Americans were just in a different category or something. So I notified the NACP what had happened, and we filed suit. We lost the suit, but we filed it anyway.
You applied some 11 times, I think, didn't you?
Well, that was 11 times. At each semester, you had to apply again, and this went on for several, for a few years. So yes, I applied every time you were supposed to apply, and each time was turned down. But we filed a mandamus suit, which asked the judge to order the university to admit me, but he turned it down. We lost. Well, we lost on the basis that we had a dual system of education. We were lawfully segregated. We were legally segregated, and so therefore they turned me down each time. And we went through a trial in the district court in Columbia, and then the NACP filed a damage suit in the federal court. We had a trial in Jefferson City, but we lost each time on the basis of segregation. And then the lawyer for the university, when I was on the stand, on the witness stand, said that I didn't really want to go to the graduate school of journalism. I had a good job at the Call. I was working already. I didn't really want to go. I was just trying to break down the segregation law. Well, as a matter of fact, we were trying to do that.
But you couldn't say so at that time.
We couldn't admit it now because we had a dual system. So it was quite a fight, even under the segregated law. The Supreme Court had said that the state had to provide the same education for blacks that it did for whites within its own borders. So that posed a problem for the state. But instead of going ahead and admitting me to the University of Missouri Journalism School, one person.
Accused you of playing games.
Yeah, that's what it was.
All right. Anytime.
When I was on the witness stand, the lawyer for the university said that I didn't really want to go to the School of Journalism, and I had already finished KU and had a job at the Call, but I was just trying to break down the laws of segregation, which actually was a fact. That's what NACP was trying to do, and that's what I was trying to do, but we couldn't admit it because we had the dual system of education. So eventually, it was a long process, but eventually the state, instead of going ahead and admitting me to the university, and as I say, nothing would have happened, they chose to build a school of journalism for me and other blacks at Lincoln University in Jefferson City. And at the same time, they decided to build a school of law for Gaines whenever he was going to show up in St. Louis. So they built a school of journalism, they built a school of law, and assembled a faculty from all over the country. They got pretty good faculty members for the School of Journalism and the School of Law. And they operated it for a while. But then I refused to go after they built the school, I refused to go to the School of Journalism at Lincoln on the grounds that it was an undergraduate school. I'd already had undergraduate work. I was applying for graduate work. They didn't have a graduate work school. So we had quite a hearing on that. Had to have a hearing then on whether the school at Lincoln was equal to the School of Journalism at Columbia. Had quite a hearing on that, and it was obvious that it wasn't because one was undergraduate and the other was graduate. It's just that simple. So despite the segregated dual system, they were almost duty-bound to admit me to the Graduate School of Journalism at MU. But to keep me out, this is hard to believe. they closed the school, graduate school of journalism at Columbia, saying that so many students and so many faculty members had to go to war. It was just the beginning of World War II. Had to go to war. They didn't have enough to keep the school open, and they kept that school closed a couple of years.
I understand that it was Charles Heston,
No,
wasn't it?
Houston.
Houston,
Charles
sorry.
Houston.
The NAACP
He was the chief
lawyer
counsel of the NAACP.
worked with you on all of this.
Yes, now he handled the Gaines case, and he also handled my case. And that was an interesting, that trial at Columbia was most interesting. One day, there was a lot of interest in that case, and one day, faculty people at Stevens College, was a private school for women, brought a class to the courtroom. The courtroom was crowded, and the students, these girls, sat around the edges of the room.
These were white women?
Yeah. And at one point, I don't remember what it was, I was on the stand, and they were questioning me, and I don't remember what the question was, whatever it was, my answer caused the students to applaud. And they applauded, and the judge said, now, if we have any more of that, I'm going to clear the courtroom. But,
well, there were some lighter times in all of it then.
But there was a good bit of interest in the case, even back then. So everybody wasn't for segregation. A lot of people wanted the university to admit me, but they didn't. So after they closed school, well, then that was the end of that.
Yeah.
They didn't have a school, you couldn't go.
And they said it was because of the war. And
Because of the war, you had to go. The students and the faculty members had to go to the army.
Now
So
that was the period
and we knew
of
better.
World War II.
Yeah, World War
And
II.
a period, I understand, when black presses generally expanded a good deal. Could you talk a little bit about the effect of World War II on the black press?
Well, there was a lot of interest naturally among black people. So, they drafted our young men to go to the service, and there was a lot of interest in what happened to them, what they were doing. So we had news of our soldiers and sailors, both from the War Department, and we had correspondence. When I say we, I mean a group of black newspapers, maybe 10 or so. The Baltimore Afro-American, Journal and Guide of Norfolk, Amsterdam News in New York, Philadelphia Tribune. We had a network of newspapers, black newspapers, who pooled their money. I mean, we couldn't afford to send a war correspondent to the European theater or the Asiatic theater. So we pooled the money, and we sent 3 or 4 different times, one at a time, over to cover the activities of black soldiers and sailors and whatnot. So we had a lot of news and pictures of activities at the war front. We had a lot of black heroes, and people wanted to read about it. So our circulation did grow during that period. And I guess, and the black weeklies all over the country carried the same thing. And that's the only way people would know what their sons and what their sons were doing, because the daily paper had war news in general. They didn't specify black or white. So there was an increase in circulation during those years. And then we also had a campaign for jobs here on the home front in the defense industry and the war industry.
Now, Mr. Franklin was very concerned with that.
He was very active in that at the very beginning, because as these we had to build defense plans, and as they built them, blacks were excluded from jobs. So Mr. Franklin and other editors, the Urban League, and other black organizations went to war to get jobs in defense and war, and first defense plans and then war plans. Right here in Kansas City, we had a bomber plant, a plant over in it's in the Fairfax district, going to build bombers, I think the B-25 bomber.
Was that Kindleberger's?
Well, yeah, he was, Kindleberger was head of the, I think it was American Aviation Company, based out in California. Well, the Kansas City Star one day carried an article saying that Kindleberger, head of this war plant, had made a statement that black people, or Negroes they said then, would not be employed in his plant except as janitors. But when he said that, the whole black community was aroused. And I remember Mr. Franklin and Louis Clammer, who's now a judge, who's now a retired judge, was working at that time with an agency in Washington. I think it was Robert Weaver was head of it, and he sent representatives around the country to get to stimulate the employment of blacks in war industry in the industries. So everybody got excited. I think we sent a little delegation to Washington to protest Mr. Kindleberger, and we organized all the organizations in the area, spearheaded by the Urban League, which was right just 2 blocks down the street. We started organizing a great mass meeting. I remember it was, we published it in the Call for 4 or 5 weeks in succession about this big meeting we were going to have to protest this. And we had meetings every week down at the Urban League where we made our plans. And when the day of the meeting came, we had people, black people, walking down to the auditorium, going on the streetcars, going in buses, and just had people just going down there. We had that auditorium filled. I mean, it was packed with people protesting it. And that got a lot of publicity. So eventually, pressure from Washington, and Mr. Randolph was in on this too, from the national point of view. When the result of it was that when this bomber plant was built, because it took a while to build it, when this bomber plant was built and went into production, blacks were on the assembly line, and Mr. Kindleberger had to take a back seat.
A good fight.
It was.
Yeah.
It was great.
Now, I think you told me that one of the few times that you had thought maybe of leaving the Call was during the war when joining the Wax appealed to
Oh,
you.
yeah, I did. I wanted to join the Wax. I sure did, yeah. But I couldn't. I didn't because my father was sick. He had had a stroke, and my mother was sick. So I just couldn't leave. But I did want to do. I did want to. Yeah.
It would have been on your conscience if you had left.
I couldn't do that.
But I think you said there was another time later when the NAACP, which was very important to you, asked you if you might like to join their staff.
Yeah, it was Walter White rather than Roy Wilkins, who preceded Mr. Wilkins. Yeah, I got a letter asking me to join the NAACP staff. And I showed it to Mr. Franklin. And Mr. Franklin talked me out of going. Talked me out of going to New York. Yeah, I was tempted though.
The NAACP always meant a great deal to you, didn't it? Probably from your father's beginnings, taking the meetings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then it was fighting for the rights of our people. And, you know, the NAACP filed a series, not just, the Gaines case was the first in a series of university cases, of cases where they're trying to break down the discrimination in state universities. The Gaines was number 1, and they filed, I can't remember exactly the order, but suits were filed in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in Texas, and in each case, the remedy was a little bit advanced over the preceding one. Now, in the Gaines case, for instance, the state had to provide professional education for blacks within its own borders. But in another case, it went a little bit further. In each one of those university cases. I'm sure you remember the Meredith case down in Texas. But in each case, the legal advantage was upped a little bit until we finally got to the big one, 1954, when the Supreme Court said segregated schools are unconstitutional. They've wiped it all out. In those university cases, it went gradually. But finally, they got to this Topeka, Brown versus Topeka. There were four. I think there were four cases in that decision. One was right here in Topeka, Kansas. Another one was in Virginia, I think. But then discrimination was unconstitutional. Period. I mean, the Supreme Court said, with and urged and ordered the states to proceed with all deliberate speed. Of course, that got to be a joke because here we are, almost 40 years later, not quite, 35 years later, and we still have segregated schools.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you've been working so hard
Still
on
have segregated
here
schools.
in Kansas City,
Yes,
isn't it?
terrible.
Now, going back to the NAACP and your interest in it, am I right that you often took your vacation periods to go to NAACP
Oh yeah,
meetings?
many times. Took my vacation to go to the NAACP convention, which met in various cities in the summertime. So it was. I enjoyed going. I just enjoyed going to conventions more so than just going and lying on the beach someplace.
Sure. And you were on the board of the NAACP for quite a long period
Yeah, I was on the
of time,
board for a
weren't you?
while. Yeah.
And
yeah.
you got an award from the NAACP, I understand?
Well, yes, they did give me a award. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but at one of the annual meetings, I think in January, the NAACP it's a corporation that has an annual meeting. They have a dinner every year when they give awards during this time. Yeah, I did get one. Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about the war, which was the 40s, and before we leave that decade of the 40s, I thought it was rather interesting that you told me that you couldn't always follow your own political feelings, your own political conscience when it came to reporting, that at one point Mr. Franklin was supporting Dewey in 1948 when you were really for Truman. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Well, yes, I was for Truman. Mr. Franklin was, you can almost say, was almost a dyed-in-the-wool Republican in those days. And Harry Truman, right here in Independence, was a friend of Mr. Franklin. They'd been friends for years. Mr. Truman was a judge on the county court, Jackson County Court. And he and Mr. Franklin were good friends, although one was Republican, one was Democrat. They were good friends. But when Truman ran for president, Mr. Franklin was for Dewey. He didn't like some of the principles of the Democrats, and so he was for Dewey. And one day I had been on my summer vacation, and had just gotten back to town. Mr. Franklin told me, I want you to go to New York and write us some articles about Tom Dewey. I had just gotten back. I didn't feel like going to the place up. But I had to do it because it was an assignment. And although I was for Truman, I went on up to New York and arranged to interview various. I didn't interview Dewey himself, but organizations and movements that he sponsored, his aides and whatnot. So I wrote 4 or 5 articles about what Dewey had done in the state of New York. That's what it was, what he had done in the state of New York for black folks, And although my heart wasn't in it, I did it factually, and it wasn't biased or anything. I just wrote some articles about Dewey.
And all the time you were for Truman.
Came back and voted for Truman. So I guess we could find the 48. Yeah, that's when it was.
That's a nice picture of you in later years, I think on into the 50s, when Truman came back from the presidency, back to his library in Independence, and you took the ambassador from Liberia.
Yeah, the ambassador from Liberia came. I don't remember what the circumstances were, but he was here and evidently wanted to meet Mr. Truman, and we arranged it, called the library. and went out and met with Mr. Truman and had a nice little conversation. I think Mr. Truman played a little something on the piano for us that day, too, because he had a piano in his office. But I voted for Truman. Mr. Franklin voted for Dewey. The next day, that was the year when it was predicted that Dewey would win, you know. They almost had him in office. You know, the Chicago Tribune had a big headline ahead of time. Dewey beats Truman. You remember that famous one?
Yes.
That's hanging up out in Truman Library right now. The next day, after Truman won this great victory, he stayed at the Mulebach Hotel, which was at 12th in Baltimore. That was his. They had stayed in, but they had a presidential suite for him. So that next day, after he won, I felt, after the call had come out for Dewey, I felt real strange, you know, going down, because Truman had a little press conference or something. And I went down there. I felt real bad going down there, because we were not for him, you know. We were for Dewey, but I had to go anyway. So I went down, and Mr. Truman was walking all around the hotel with reporters and all following him. He was so happy, you know. So there's nothing unpleasant about it. I mean, I guess I'm sure he knew Mr. Franklin didn't support it. But that was a great feeling for him, and I enjoyed it too, because I was for him anyway. You know, he was so happy that he. I think he had one of those papers with him then, or Chicago Tribune.
Then to jump a little bit on to the 60s.
Why it was? Well, I think
You did tell me once that
They had
there
a
was a
meeting.
time when you had reported
oh yes,
on one of their meetings
Oh, yeah.
and said there were less people than
Yeah,
they
yeah,
wanted
that's what
to
it-
have said were there.
that's what it was. Yeah, that's what
Okay.
it was.
Anytime.
Now, moving into the 60s, we're skipping a decade, but to get some of these interesting things in, I understand that that was a time when many of the young black militants felt that the NAACP and the black press was moving just too slowly for them to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. Did that happen here in Kansas City, and did the Black Panthers, for instance, have any kind of, any sort of trouble with the call?
Well, yes, we had a chapter of Black Panthers, the young people. And that was the period when we were focusing on black power. That was their theme, black power. And they did think the NAACP was moving too slowly, because the NAACP moved through the court, and that is slow. So Black Panthers had meetings. They had a headquarters here, and it was in this same general area, about 20-something in Florida. And the Kansas City Police Department kept an eye on them. They had a helicopter that went around disturbing the neighbors. The neighbors used to complain because the helicopter made so much noise, and they were patrolling the Panthers' headquarters. I went to a meeting they had once. They had what they call a press conference about something. I went to the meeting, and the fellow started talking and started using pretty bad language, you know. And I said to him, I said, now you all don't need to use language like that. So they stopped doing it while I was there, you know. But later, they had a meeting, they had a protest of some kind down at the federal courthouse down at 811 Grand. And they were supposed to be attracting a great big crowd. I don't know what they were protesting now. But we covered the meeting. And they didn't have that great big crowd. So they had a small crowd. So in our call paper, that's Friday, I wrote the article and said that they didn't have a big people. They only had a certain number of people. They didn't have the big crowd they expected. But I didn't think anything about it. But that Friday, when it came out, the Panthers a group of them came to the call office, raising Cain about what we said about the meeting, that they didn't have this crowd. Well, I don't come to the office on Fridays, but they called me and told me this was going on, you know. And so I think I came down, and they finally kind of calmed down, because we were telling the truth, you know, that they didn't have that big crowd. But they retaliated by going to various outlets where our paper was sold. They went to some drugstores, newsstand, and told them to take the call off the stand. Take the call off the stand.
Did they take it off?
Some of them did. There was a particular one that's been selling the call for years and years and years at drugstore at 20, I think it was 22nd and Vine, that had been selling the call for years and years and years. I went by there, and they had taken the call off the top of the counter. And I said, why did you want to do it? Well, we got it underneath. They had it underneath, you see. But they were afraid because the Panthers told them to take it off. And the Panthers were in there all the time. So the people were afraid not to. They were trying to cut our circulation. Well, that went on for a couple of 3 weeks, and then the people started selling the paper. Yeah, we didn't have too much trouble out of the Panthers after that. In fact, I see one or two of them every once in a while. They're speaking real friendly. Remind me of those days.
How times change.
A couple of them are still around here.
To go back to the 50s and to go back to your writing on the call, as the years went by, how did it happen that you, rather than one of the men on the staff, got more and more responsibility? So that you went from being managing editor to then full editor and then publisher. Wasn't that rather rare that this would happen to a woman, and a young woman at that?
Well, maybe so, but we didn't have too many men around, and I was sort of aggressive and just kind of took over, you know. And then I liked to get around and go here and there. And so I don't know how that happened. It just happened.
And Mr. Franklin got rather ill in the 50s, didn't he?
Yeah, well, Mr. Franklin, well, to answer that other question, Mr. Franklin, for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason had quite a bit of confidence in me. I don't know why, but he did, and maybe that was the reason. I don't know. Well, we kind of thought alike. Well, we didn't on that Truman do it, but we didn't have any confrontation over it. You know, I just went on up there and did the articles on through it. But he did have confidence in me for some reason. So yes, when he got sick, he had Parkinson's disease, which handicapped him. He used to type his own editorials. I'd come in sometimes in the morning. Mr. Franklin never had a desk and a secretary of his own. He never had a secretary. And maybe that's why I don't have one. But he typed his own editorials. He didn't even have a typewriter. So he would come to anybody's desk, any vacant typewriter. Mr. Franklin decided he was going to write something, he'd sit down and write it. I used to come in the morning, and here's Mr. Franklin at my desk, typing away. And I have to stand around and wait till he gets through. You know, you say, you don't say, Mr. Franklin, get up or anything like that. You just stand around till he got through. So when he got this Parkinson's disease, you know, it affected his hand. It affected his thumb first, one thumb. But he couldn't hold steady. And I remember Mr. Franklin, he was kind of disgusted with it. He said, damn that thumb. But it spread, as long as it's just a thumb, he could type. But then gradually, as the years went by, he couldn't use his hand, and then he couldn't use his arm. So he was having trouble. So I just said to him one day, Mr. Franklin, if you want me to, you can dictate your editorials, and I'll type them for you. So he said, all right. So we did that. He'd talk, say what he wanted to say, and I could type pretty fast. So I typed his editorials for him, and he wrote them that way for a long time. And then as it progressed, he sometimes didn't want to write them or didn't feel like it, and he might write one, and the column needed more, so then I would write one, and to fill out the column. Just you know, went along with it however he wanted to do it. So sometimes people couldn't tell after that whether I wrote the editorial or whether he did. And that's the way I got into the writing of the editorials, just gradually that way. I'd write them for him as long as he felt like doing it. When he didn't feel like doing it, then I would do it. And so it was just a gradual process that I just went right on in. After he stopped writing altogether, then I just started writing them. That's the way it happened.
That must have all been very hard on him because he was into so many different parts of the call. You told me once
Yeah.
he even used to go out and sell the newspapers himself on Friday.
Oh, he always did until he got sick. Mr. Franklin sold the paper himself every Friday. He'd get up at 5 o'clock. They started at 5 o'clock in the morning. The newsboys would come down, and Mr. Franklin sold them personally to the newsboys. When the call first started, it was a nickel, as I told you, and we sold them to they sold them to the newsboys for 2 for a nickel. So the kid would buy them two for a nickel and sell it for a nickel, and it went up to a dime and then 15 cents and kept going. But he sold those papers himself every Friday. That was it. He prided himself on that job. He wouldn't turn that over to anybody else.
And the newsboys would go out then and make the kind of calls that newsboys did in those days?
Well, yeah, earlier in the 30s and 40s, they had a cry. The kids would say, "Kansas City call paper," and they'd sing that all over town. Some people complained because they said they woke them up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But that was a constant cry that they had, and they kept that up for a long time.
And then Franklin cared a great deal about his presses. You said he was a man who was a printer
Well, he was
in
a
the
printer.
beginning.
Yeah, he was a printer.
And he cared so much about those presses that he wanted to have his funeral in the press room, I think you told me.
Well, yes, he was very fond of those presses. He even built the building that is east of this main building was erected for a new press that he bought. It was a 64-page rotary Goss press, and yeah, he liked machinery. He liked machinery, and he was very fond of his presses. So his funeral was held in the press room. It was held in the press room. I don't know whether Mrs. Franklin's wish or whether he had told her he wanted to have his funeral in the press room. I don't remember how that was. But anyway, the funeral was held there with flowers around the press, and we had the funeral up on the dock where he sold papers. Had the funeral up on the dock where we sold papers, and people spoke from the platform there. That was quite unusual.
Then you had quite a lot of responsibility after he died and had to go on writing the editorials. What has it been? 1, sometimes 2 every week all these years?
Yeah, 1 or 2. Every once in a while you'd write kind of long-winded, so most of them it is just about 2. Sometimes 3 short ones, but most of the time 2 pretty good sized ones. So after he died, I just kept on writing the editorials and getting the paper out.
There have been some very important things that you've covered in the life of Kansas City and really in the history of the whole country. In the 60s, for instance, with the Public Accommodations Act and then Martin Luther King's death, and you had something very important to say at all those times. Could we take some of the very high spots, really, in national history and tell me the kinds of things that you did and the sort of things that you used as themes in your editorials? Let's talk about the 1963 Public Accommodations Act.
Well, that was a very important issue in this community. Before that was passed, black people could not eat in the public restaurants. They couldn't go to downtown movies. Now this was a little earlier than 63, through the years. Everything was segregated. Blacks had their own restaurants, had their own theaters out in the 18th and Vine area. But as time went on, there was a movement to eliminate the discrimination in public places. We started with the municipal auditorium. The music hall, which is a part of the municipal auditorium, was a scene of the Philharmonic concerts, and black citizens in a tax-owned building. Blacks were expected to sit in the balcony, and black people picketed sometimes I remember in the cold winter time, when snow was on the ground, they'd picket to get the city to open all the seats to anybody who could pay for them. So that we started with the municipally owned facilities first, and then a group of young women decided that they were going to break down discrimination in the downtown stores, and they had protests and marches in front of the stores. Then there was a group called the CCSA, Community Citizens for Social Action. That group organized protests in the downtown departments. The whole community finally joined in. And even before that movement, a group of white and black citizens who worked together in an organization called Committee for the Practice of Democracy, and then we organized Fellowship House. We organized, it was an interracial group that met regularly and pooled their money and bought a house called Fellowship House, where they held meetings and had social events and things of that sort. So out of that group, Fellowship House and the Committee for the Practice of Democracy, even before they started this formal protest downtown, these groups challenged these restaurants and movie houses. They organized teams, a black and a white. They would go and make tests at various restaurants. If you get turned down, well, you get turned down. But we were part of that for a while. Then later, when we decided that we would try to get an ordinance passed, that was after we had elected 2 black people to the city council for the first time. That was back in, I think that was in '63. Well, before that, we never had any blacks on the governing body of the city. So the ordinance was introduced in the city council by Bruce Watkins, who was one of the first black councilmen. He was elected along with Mr. Earl Thomas. Well, that ordinance took a long time to pass the city council. There was just a lot of opposition, and there were a few for it, but we couldn't get it passed. Because I remember Friday after Friday, the city council meets on Friday. I would go down, even after I'd worked late on Thursday night, I would go down to the city council every Friday to watch the progress of the ordinance.
And usually Friday was your one day of rest, wasn't it?
Right. Because we could put the paper out Thursday night and
very late.
And very late, and so I liked to rest on Friday. But while this public accommodations ordinance was being considered, I just felt like I had to go down there and see what happened. So that was quite a struggle. And in the meantime, we wrote articles urging the city council to pass it, and it seems like it took forever, but it finally got passed, 11-2, and people predicted that there'd be a lot of disorder at the restaurants if it was open to everybody, that black would flock in, and run white customers away and all that. None of that happened. When the ordinance passed, everything went smoothly. It had been protested quite vigorously by a group of tavern owners who thought people were going to come in and take over their taverns, have a lot of trouble. But they didn't, and eventually everybody's accepted. Nobody pays any attention to it now.
What a hard fight, but
a great big whole fight for nothing.
Well won. Then in 1968, there was Martin Luther King's assassination, and that was something in which you played an important part here.
Well, not in assassination, but
no. but in comics.
In the rioting that happened happened.
What were your feelings when you heard about Martin
Oh
Luther
my
King's
goodness,
assassination?
I was just sick, as most people were. You felt like you lost a member of your family. Martin Luther King was so well known and so highly respected, you know. And for that to happen to him, that was it was just terrible. It was terrible.
I know you wrote that editorial quite soon afterwards, even when you may have been in a state of shock yourself, but it was a beautiful editorial. May he not have died in vain, with the idea that this terrible, terrible thing had happened, but that his spirit could go on if people willed it to, if Congress and the city could pass the fair housing laws that were then before them, if the blacks could realize that his was a spirit of nonviolence, and if they could continue in that way.
Yes, if we could follow the principles that he lived by and continue to carry out his fight, his nonviolent, keep it nonviolent, for full democracy, equality for everybody, that maybe he wouldn't have died in vain.
And then you went to his funeral, didn't you?
Yes, Mrs. Franklin was from Atlanta, and she wanted to go to the funeral. She was rather getting a little feeble, so she couldn't go by herself. So I took Miss Franklin to Atlanta, and we went to the funeral, and went by and after the funeral and visited with Mrs. King and her children for a while. And then when we came home, well, there were quite a little delegation from Kansas City went down to the funeral. We came back on a plane, on the same plane, I guess maybe a dozen, 15 or 20, something like that. And on the way home, we'd almost gotten into Kansas City when the pilot or somebody in the airplane told us that there was rioting going on in Kansas City. See, this was 3 or 4 days after his death. And that's the way we found out about it, is on the way in. So we got here in the midst of some rioting.
Then Herman Johnson, a friend of yours, told me that you and he and some other people were together at a meeting very soon after that to try to decide what could be done.
Yeah. Herman was here before the rioting started, and I think was down at the City Hall when some students, black students, marched to the City Hall to protest the fact that school was not dismissed, I guess on the day of his funeral.
That's right, in Kansas City, Missouri, I think.
I think in Kansas, the children had a holiday, and the Kansas City, Missouri people didn't. So there was a protest about that, and something during that march on the way down sparked this rioting.
I think they started out rather quietly, and they had teachers and a minister going along with them.
Yeah, they just want to know why
it was only when they got down to the City Hall that something sparked them.
Yes, So after that, there was rioting all through the community. We lost a lot of buildings. And I think the meeting that Herman was talking about was in connection with what we can do to stop it or to prevent any further violence. I think while we were in that meeting, we heard that a building on the corner from where we were was burning up. And I know that it was a little, we were wondering about how safe it was to get out on the street, in order to get home. Seemed like to me that was a drugstore that burned down on Indiana someplace.
I remember Herman saying that if you hadn't had the kind of calming voice that you did in the call, there might have been a lot more violence than there was. And the themes that I read, reading your editorials at that time, seemed in many ways some of the same themes you've brought out in editorials. one, that no matter how bad the tragedy may be, there may be some good that can come out of it, and two, that there should be an investigation of these terrible things that happen, in this case, of the whole assassination, and second, of what happened
What happened,
in
what happened in
City.
Kansas City? They finally had to call out the National Guard, and I remember being in the middle of some violence on Prospect, and I can't remember hiding underneath a car or something to keep out of the way of some bullets. So I was kind of in the middle of it there for a while.
You were, yes.
Shouldn't have been there, but I was.
When I read that editorial calling for the investigation, it harked back to the Sykeston days when you had felt that more must be known
That's right.
about this terrible situation.
That's right. I think we had a study commission, too, to investigate our writing here. And several people were killed in that
Yes, I
writing.
think 5, maybe half a dozen.
Yeah, that's right. Uh-huh.
Then those were terrible days. In 1970, there was the killing of Leon Jordan, who had done such good things for Kansas City and had been a close friend of yours.
Another great tragedy. Leon was just shot down.
I remember reading in the call that a car came by at night. One man shot him in a hip, and then another one got out and shot him twice more after he had fallen.
He was closing. He had a business at 26th and Prospect, and he was closing his business. Had locked it and was walking to his car when this car came by and shot him. That was a great loss to Kansas City and to the whole nation. But Leon was well known all over. He was a police officer at one time, and went to Liberia to organize the police force over there. And when he came back, he spent 8 or 9 years in Africa. And when he came back, when he started the business that he owned. But he was a community leader. He and Bruce Watkins formed a political organization, but before that, black voters were under the thumb of the old Pendergast machine. They often say that Pendergast taught black people how to vote, taught them to vote, but also taught them how to vote. And I think Leon and Bruce, who worked with the political organization with the white bosses for a number of years, found out that they got tired of white bosses telling black people how to vote. So they decided that they would form a political organization where blacks could be more independent.
And that was Freedom Inc.
That was Freedom Inc. Yeah, it was, yeah. They learned all they could from the white organization on how political organizations work and how they're supposed to work. They learned it from them. And then they withdrew and did it themselves, yeah.
I was thinking as I read your editorial at the time called A Great Loss and a Great Tragedy that it must have been very difficult to write an editorial about the assassination of your own friend.
Yeah, he'd been a friend of mine almost all my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that was a terrible shock.
You struck that same note that there is in some of your other editorials when you said, Leon will never die because the things that he stood for and the organization that he founded and headed, Freedom Inc., will live on. You could see this growing out of his life.
Well, actually it has lived on too, and we had another tragedy when Bruce died, but Freedom is still here.
Yeah.
May not be as strong as it was when Leon and Bruce were running it, but it's still here and going strong.
Speaking of Bruce Watkins, that seemed to me the next most important thing that you wrote about. That was in 1978 and 79 when Bruce Watkins was running for mayor, yes. And what did you do at that time?
I've never worked so hard in a political race in my life. We worked very, very hard for Bruce Watkins to be mayor. He was a good candidate. He had charisma. He spoke well. People liked him. White and black people liked him, especially black people, because sometimes he irritated white people, you know. But Bruce was a good candidate, and everybody got behind him. We had meetings every week. I had never attended political meetings regularly. I didn't take part in political campaigns very much. But in this instance, we had a chance to elect a mayor, and we thought we had a good candidate, so we all got behind him. All kinds of organizations, church groups, social groups, fraternity groups, political groups, all kinds of groups got behind Bruce Watkins for mayor campaign. And I've never been to a political meeting every week, but I did, I guess 2 or 3 months during his campaign. And I wrote articles about Bruce and what it would mean to have what it would mean to have a mayor. We really thought we could win. Really thought we could win, because Bruce was very, very popular, very popular. So you say, what did I do? I wrote articles, and I wrote editorials, and I went to meetings and helped plan the campaign.
I thought it was interesting in one of the editorials that I read that you tried to give people a sense of their own worth and importance when you tried to get them out to vote. You told them to strut to the polls.
Strut to the polls, because they had a good candidate, and if we had, the point was, if blacks vote in large numbers, we can win. It's not enough just to register. After you register, you've got to vote.
Right.
And usually our voter turnout is pretty low. I don't know why people won't go to the polls, but they just, and in this case, they went to the polls better than they had at any other time.
Now, I thought it was interesting that Bruce Watkins did lose the primary, unfortunately, because he didn't.
No, he won the primary.
I'm sorry.
He won the primary. There were 3 people, let's see. I remember three main candidates. Might have been 2 others, but there were 3 main candidates in the primary. Mayor Charles Wheeler, who had been mayor already for 2 terms. He was seeking a 3rd term. Mayor Wheeler, he got the most, Berkeley got the 2nd, and Wheeler got the third highest. And of course, in the primary, you reduced the candidates to 2, so Mayor Wheeler was dropped. And in the general election, it was between Watkins and Berkeley. So again, we worked hard and urged people to vote in large numbers again to beat Bruce. And he seemed to have the support. This was kind of a strange situation. We have a nonpartisan city election where we don't have political identity either on the ballot or even not supposed to have it during the campaign. But traditionally, in Kansas City, where the Democrats outnumber the Republicans, where they did, I don't know where they do now, not because things are different. But people, although it's a nonpartisan election, Kansas City had not elected a Republican candidate for mayor, I think, since 1924. Mm-hmm. And although you're not supposed to label yourself Republican and Democrat, people know whether you're Democrat or Republican, you know. And Bruce pulled no bones about the fact that he was a Democrat, and the Democrats had the majority of people. And the Democratic organizations in town and Democratic leaders said they would support Watkins. The labor organization said they would support Watkins. So we felt pretty good about that, especially since it was traditional to elect a Democrat as mayor. But in the general election, Mr. Berkeley, who was a Republican, won. He defeated Watkins. And the Democratic organizations and the labor groups, which had said they were going to support Watkins, didn't do it. They let Bruce down. They didn't do it. They let Bruce down, let us down. So
I
therefore
remember
he
you had
lost.
2 editorials on March 30th of 1979, and one was that the only inference that can be drawn is that Watkins lost because he is black.
That's right.
But the other editorial
right.
also was that now the voters have voted, and we all have to draw together around the person who has been elected. So there was both the positive and the negative that you expressed.
Yeah, I think we urged that since Mr. Berkeley won, that we should rally around him and support him. And he was Berkeley was very diplomatic. He didn't he didn't brag that he won or anything. He was very sensitive and cooperated with people in a quiet way, and finally people rallied around him and they like Berkeley now. He's still the mayor, and they like him now. He's all right.
Then in 1982 there was another important election with a more positive result, and that was the election of Alan Wheat for Congress from the 5th District.
Yeah.
What was your part in that election?
Well, we supported Wheat just about like we did Watkins at first. When it was first mentioned that Wheat was going to run, at first we were skeptical. We didn't think. For instance, I didn't think he could win. I didn't think we could win the black man could win a congressional seat at that time. But he was confident. He thought he could. He had been a state representative, was a very competent lawmaker, a smart young man. And he thought he could win, and most of the people didn't think so.
Very early on, you wrote as Louis Blue an editorial that was kind of I saw it as kind of a teaser because it had a question mark at the end, and it was Alan Wheat for Congress. That was in March of 1982.
Kind of bringing the subject up to see what people thought. But at that time, we didn't think that he had too much of a chance. And after we had this experience with Watkins, and it's a much wider office. I mean, it takes in black people. When we knew the black voters couldn't elect Wheat. He'd have to have a lot of white support in order to win. But that was a surprise, and we worked hard for him, although we weren't sure he could win.
You covered every event.
Yeah, we covered everything.
Small and large.
That's
put
right.
His name before people.
And then we got into the spirit and tried to get the community in the spirit of way maybe we can elect him.
Yeah, you told the community there had to be more fire in the campaign in one of your editorials.
Yeah, we raised a good campaign for him.
And then I remember that editorial that you wrote that was called "Hope They Mean It This Time."
Oh, well, he was getting some promises of support, and we were hoping that they would really keep their promises this time,
not let him down,
not like him like they did Watkins. Then there was another very positive part of Wheat's campaign. He was support. He got the support, and when we found out that Congressman Bowling, who had been a congressman from this area for 34 years, 17 terms. He'd been congressman for 34 years in this area, popular congressman most of the time. And there was quite a large group of people trying to get his seat when he said he wasn't going to run. A lot of people filed. I've forgotten whether there were 11 or quite a large number of people running for the office. So if we wanted to run, all right. And if we had lost, there wouldn't have been any. There wouldn't have been any disgrace or anything like that, because they had a large group, and that probably played into his hands because all the other candidates were were white, and the white vote therefore was divided among all these people. When the black community could come out solidly behind Wheat, which it did, and helped him get through. He won the primary out of all those people. That was really kind of miraculous.
Quite close, I guess. In fact, he
Yeah,
had
it was
conceded defeat, hadn't he, at one point?
No, that was in the general.
Mm-hmm.
When he conceded defeat, I think, was after the primary. He won the primary, and he won the Democratic primary. Out of all these candidates, which was kind of a surprise.
Yes.
But,
and how sweet it must have been when he really won.
Yeah, but then too, Bowling threw his support to Wheat. That was a factor that was very much in Wheat's favor. The sitting congressman endorsed this young man. So in the general election, when he was pitted against a Republican named John Carnes, who was an Independence, Missouri councilman. We didn't know whether Wheat could beat him or not, you know. But we kept working hard and urging people to vote, especially in large numbers. And that is, on the night of the general election, is when we thought Wheat had lost. In fact, the newscast came out that he had conceded. He had conceded defeat to Carnes. Well, that was more or less, I mean, that was kind of halfway expected, you know. But later, after some more, all the votes weren't in. So other votes came in, and toward the end of the night, Wheat had won. Which was really a surprise. A surprise to him, because he conceded himself.
You had an editorial then on how sweet the victory was when you had thought it was defeat.
Sure, because imagine electing a young black fella to the Congress of the United States in a district that is only about a fifth or so black. This was a mostly white district, and they voted for Wheat because they at the meetings and campaign rallies and whatnot. Wheat was an outstanding candidate. From the way he talked, what he said, and they were impressed. People were impressed with him, and I say all these other folks. We divided the white vote with all the different candidates, and everybody's trying to get Bowling's seat.
Mm-hmm. The other interesting editorial that you wrote after the election was that the white people didn't have to fear that Wheat would truly be a congressman of all the people.
Oh, yeah, we made that point quite clear. We weren't supporting Wheat because he was black, but because we thought he was the best candidate, was best qualified, and that if he got in, he would not represent just black people or be a black congressman, but he would be a congressman for everybody. And that's turned out to be very, very true. Because as a congressman, Wheat devotes much more of his time to his white constituents than he does to his black ones. He's got more white ones, and that's what he should do. When he has his forum, he has forums public forums several times a year, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. And he has them in all parts of the metropolitan area. And he has them in Lee Summit and Belton and Raytown and places like that, rather than in the black community. And sometimes black people complain that he has his forums outside of the black community. Well, that's what he should do.
Yeah.
Because he has constituents all over the area.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, this kind of thinking on your part and writing it is probably what made one of the Kansas City Star writers say that you're one of the most astute political analysts in the area.
No, I don't think that's true.
Oh, there's so many issues that you've followed, Ms. Bluford, and editorialized on, but I think it's probably the school desegregation one that's been as close to your heart as any, hasn't it?
Well, yes, it has. We've always been against segregation, and we've been fighting segregated schools, as I say, way back in the 30s when we filed these university suits. That was against segregation. Mm-hmm. Because segregation is an evil practice. And
then you mentioned the 1954 education decision.
We got the decision, but we didn't get the results that we wanted. Because
didn't make any immediate difference in Kansas City, did it?
No, it should have, but it didn't. The school board didn't follow the Supreme Court decision right away. In fact, they delayed it. Now, if the school board had actually desegregated the school system, tried to desegregate like it's trying to do now, we would have had a beautiful integrated system, because at that time, the black population was about 30%. The white population was about 70%. Just the opposite of what it is now. Now it's 70% or 75% black. And it's hard to integrate a system when you haven't got enough white people to integrate it.
Kansas City School Board just dragged its feet.
Dragged its feet. It just moved as slowly as it could, and had to be pushed into everything that they did.
Now,
So
I understand that at the time of the suit that both black and white parents brought, you testified for some 3 hours, was it, about the importance of desegregation?
Yeah, well, that was after that metropolitan school desegregation case had been filed in '77, I believe
Yes.
it was. Yeah.
3 hours of testimony.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
And I understand that the lawyers for the other side said that a great deal of your testimony wasn't relative.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas the Kansas City Star, at least, thought it was very relative.
Well, we talked about the early days of what we had to go through under segregation. How black children had to walk past a white school. For instance, I lived about 2 blocks from a white school. I had to walk by that school and walk about 12 blocks further to get to a black school. Segregation was really silly, you know, it really was. But we've been fighting segregation all along, and still are having to do it. But we could have had a most beautiful desegregated school system if we had acted in 1955, 56, and 57, instead of waiting and acting in 1970-something.
Yeah.
But
And now it's all still being worked out.
yeah, it's still being worked out 40 years later.
I thought this editorial that you've got on your desk now, a golden recruitment opportunity missed, was a very interesting one.
Oh, this was about a contest, a competition in one of our high schools, in which the winners would go to Georgetown University in Washington for a summer enrichment program. And the students who happened to win, the students who won happened to be 2 white students. Well, everybody had a chance to enter, and it just happened that the 2 white students won. But the black parents and black students protested because they didn't think the prizes should go to the white students, and they took it to the school board, and I think the school board decided that it wouldn't send the 2 white students to Georgetown that summer. And this editorial says that we didn't think that was right. Just because we've been fighting for years and years and years against discrimination against blacks, and now here we were discriminating against white people because they're white. If you don't want to be discriminated because you're black, you also don't want to be discriminated because you're white. So the school board turned down the schools, the high schools. I think it was Southwest? Yeah, it was Southwest High School. Wouldn't send the children because they were white. Now you know that's wrong. So that's why this editorial said a golden recruitment opportunity, meaning that we're having this desegregation case, trying to attract white students to the Kansas City School District, trying to attract them,
Yeah.
and then when they come in and achieve, then you want to slap them in the face.
Doesn't make very much sense.
If you sent the white students
Really?
on it, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I think somebody provided some money though, and they got to go. I hope so.
Glad of
I
that.
think they did.
Well, then if we come up to very recently, just last May of 1989, it seemed as though there was more than poetic justice when you got that honorary Doctorate of Humanities from the University of Missouri.
Yeah.
I think that the citation that went along with that honorary doctorate was just so beautiful, as they said that they now humbly recognized that the young girl whom they had turned away from their gates so many years ago had used her pen so well through the years to fight for what was right in education and employment and so many other phases of life.
Yeah, well, that came as somewhat of a surprise 50 years later.
I think it was Donna who told me that Mr. Benton, with whom you've worked for so many years on the call, when they called from the University of Missouri, answered the phone, and when he was told what they wanted, said, "You mean they're going to let her in now?"
Well, is that the end?
Anything else we should say, do you think?
I don't know. Honestly.
What do you think, Pete? Should we say that's the end, or should we?
I think that's fine. I'll get a few other shots.
Eagleton for quite a long time, haven't you?
Yeah.
Did you support him in a political campaign?
Oh yeah, we supported him.
Too?
Oh yeah.
He probably appreciated
Yeah,
that.
he did.
It has been a long time, too, because the picture that I had...
Pretty or something. But he was Attorney General, and then ran for the Senate.
Yeah. I thought it was such a shame when he was up for vice president.
Oh, wasn't that a shame?
And just because he'd gone for some help,
yeah, that was
psychic help, the way so many people should go and
that's
don't.
right. That's right.
That he was
That
put
was
down
terrible.
for
Yeah,
it. That was such a
It
shame.
was. I think we talked about that presidential campaign. We gave him down the country for that, too.
It was bad for Eagleton, and it was bad for the whole thought that anybody who
Has to have
knows he
psychiatric
needs
treatment.
help, that
Yeah.
goes to get it, is put down for it rather than appreciated
Right. Mm-hmm.
for it.
That was terrible.
Yeah.
What's he taking now?
Shots of your interviewer.
Oh, okay.
So I think we did pretty well bringing out the different themes of your editorials, optimism, ways of making good things come out of even bad situations, pushing for people to vote and pushing for them to vote with good feelings about their community and themselves.
Maybe so. I couldn't tell.
You'll tell better when you see how it all hangs
How long was
together.
that? I need it, not have it.
Do you get pleasure out of writing your editorials now?
Not now, since I got to write them by hand.
No, that's so different when you have to do
Oh
it
yeah,
with
like
a
a
broken
typewriter.
arm.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I enjoy it.
That would have been
Except
another
you-
good question for me to ask.
Except usually on Thursdays now, I'm usually so tired that I don't feel like doing it.
But I remember you gave me a very interesting answer before to the question of how do you write your editorials.
What did I say?
Remember you said that you it just sort of
Ideas
flows
kind of come
once you
to
get started.
Mm-hmm. But before I had trouble with my eyes, I read the papers regularly anyway. But now I have a hard time reading them every day.
Oh, it's so difficult when it gets to be so much slower.
Yeah, so
isn't it?
slow.
You know, because with the same amount of effort, you can only do a very small amount in comparison to what you did before.
What I used to do, yeah. But you get old, you just get old, I guess.
Well, it happens to everybody.
Get
I
old.
think. And why is it that someone who that happens so often?
A friend of mine that went, I told you went to Thailand. You went to another time. Gerard Bryant. He's from California. You know Dr. Bryant?
Yes, I do.
Dr. Bryant loved to read, and he lost his eyesight. He lost his eyesight and he moved out to California to be with his daughter. But he used to say, I knew something was wrong. I got so I couldn't read my Time magazine.
Oh, gee.
Now he can't read anything.
Miss Bluford, I understand in connection with this idea of your being the voice of conscience in Kansas City, that there have been times even when people who are friends of yours have said things that you felt weren't in accord with everybody's good, that you felt you would speak out against what that person has said. Do you have any examples of that?
Well, you mean when I might feel like criticizing somebody that's my
Yes.
friend? Well, yes. I remember a time when we were considering busing as a transportation of students as a means of desegregating classrooms. And I think my friend Senator Eagleton came out strongly against busing. Well, I ran an editorial at that time, an article criticizing him for his stand on busing when we were using busing as a means of ending the long-standing segregated classrooms. Although I usually agree with Senator Eagleton, he has a good voting record, I thought he was wrong on that occasion, and so stated. We had a little debate kind of on the issue. So, and I'm sure there are other if friends or enemies, they do or say something that I don't think is in the interest of the people at large. I have no hesitation about speaking out against them, friend or foe.
You do what needs to be done.
Try to.
Is there a way that, maybe I could do it with Bluford's probably sort of tired now, do just something that would be identification of these things, and then it could either, my voice could... and stuff. Oh, the other one thing I was thinking I'd like to get in that we didn't, I wanted to get in that Mr. Franklin had been the one who had composed that creed that I like so much in the call. I do. Maybe we can put it in anyway, yeah. We'll put it in, maybe right after this. Because that has your name on the, I've got a good one with your name on the masthead and Donna's under yours. They might want to use that one right after the other. Now, the call's platform was written by C.A. Franklin. The call believes that America can best lead the world away from racial and national antagonism when it accords to every man, regardless of race, color, or creed, his human and legal rights. Hating no man, fearing no man, the call strives to help every man in the firm belief that all are hurt as long as anyone is held back. This is a creed that has been adopted by the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which was formerly known as the National Negro Publishers Association. And so it's used by many other members of the black press. In this 1928 issue of the Lincolnian, John Bluford, Lucile Bluford's father, is on the left-hand page, the third